So we're constantly told that there are really only two ways to handle the ego, right? Like you either have to completely destroy it and transcend all your worldly attachments, or you have to fiercely protect it. Build your personal brand and guard your identity at all costs.
Yeah, it's a very black and white way of looking at it.
Exactly. But what if both of those approaches are just a complete trap? What if, treating your identity like a fully furnished rental property is actually the only way to stay sane?
I mean, that is a radical reframing because, well, we live in this profoundly modern paradox right now.
Oh, totally.
We've got access to the entire sum of human knowledge literally in our pockets, right? And we spend half our lives carefully curating these digital identities. And yet somehow we have never felt more unmoored.
We really haven't. And that is exactly why we are going on a mission today.
I love a good mission.
Right. So for this deep dive, we're pulling from this really fascinating collection of philosophical texts that, honestly, they completely deconstruct the architecture of the human soul.
They really do. It's dense stuff, but so rewarding.
It is. So we're taking all of this profound material on selfhood, on wisdom, and personal growth, and we're going to extract a practical roadmap for you. The goal is to figure out how to build an enduring, balanced internal life in what is basically an increasingly chaotic world.
Which we all desperately need right now.
Seriously. If you ever struggle with that exhausting tug of war inside your own head, bouncing between being way too hard on yourself and then just throwing your hands up because the pressure's too much, this deep dive is going to fundamentally change how you view your own mind.
But to do that properly, we really have to start at the absolute bedrock.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, before we can figure out how to manage our daily stress or, stop bouncing between those extremes you mentioned, we need to understand what a healthy mind actually looks like. And the foundational concept here in the sources is something called settled wisdom.
Settled wisdom. Right, because I feel like our default mode right now is just frantic acquisition.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Frantic acquisition.
You know what I mean? You have 50 tabs open in your browser, you're listening to audiobooks on 2x speed, you're just constantly consuming opinions, and you always think, if I just get one more piece of information, I'll finally figure my life out.
Yeah, but true wisdom isn't about hoarding facts. Not at all. In fact, frantic acquisition actually prevents wisdom.
Interesting.
The whole idea of settled wisdom is that you have to take what is already known to you and literally actively settle it into its rightful place within your soul.
So it's about, structure.
Exactly. It is about structure and endurance. And the mechanism for doing this, the actual how-to from the texts, is fascinating. It requires stripping away excess language and embracing what they call measured thought.
Okay, let's unpack this, because stripping away excess language sounds a little bit abstract. How does the language I use in my own head prevent knowledge from settling?
Think about the internal monologue of a highly stressed person.
I am very familiar with that monologue.
Right. When something goes wrong, the language we use is often incredibly hyperbolic. We say things like, my life is ruined, or I am a complete failure, or this whole thing is a total disaster.
Yeah, catastrophizing.
Exactly. And when we use that excessive dramatic language, we build a distorted psychological reality. Your brain reacts to the hyperbole, not the actual reality of the situation.
Oh, wow. So you're basically tricking your own nervous system into panicking.
Precisely. So measured thought is the discipline of literally downsizing your internal vocabulary to perfectly match the truth of the situation.
So instead of, my life is ruined,
you say, I failed this specific test, or I'm disappointed right now. When you strip away that theatrical language, your thoughts stop flying around like a hurricane. They finally settle.
You stop being distracted by the noise of your own panic.
And you start seeing the underlying patterns of life.
That makes so much sense. To me, that frantic acquisition of data is kind of like having a massively messy closet.
Oh, I like that analogy.
You keep going to the store and buying 100 new shirts, which is the new information, thinking that having more clothes will finally make you look put together.
Right. The magic new shirt that fixes everything.
Exactly. But buying more shirts doesn't help you get dressed in the morning if you haven't taken the time to fold, hang, and organize the clothes you already have on the floor.
Yes.
Settling the knowledge, using measured thought, that is doing the laundry. It's actually building the wardrobe.
What's fascinating here is how this pushes back against our entire modern economic and social structure. We are deeply conditioned to believe that consumption equals understanding.
More is always better.
Right. But wisdom is an architectural project. It's not about how much material you hold in your hands. It's about how securely the bricks are actually laid.
So it doesn't just fall over when the wind blows.
Exactly. You want to create a cohesive internal structure that can actually endure a crisis, rather than just a scattered pile of trivia that collapses the moment things get hard.
So you stop just wearing whatever's on the floor and you actually build an outfit.
That's the goal.
But if we follow that logic, you can't really organize a closet if you don't have a room to put it in.
That's very true.
So to settle this wisdom, we need a stable foundation. And based on these sources in the architecture of the human soul, that foundational room is the self. But what exactly is that self?
This is where we move from the mind down to the absolute center of the individual, which is the ego. The texts point out that the journey of self-discovery inevitably begins by saying the word I.
Which I've got to say surprised me at first.
Why is that?
Because if you read almost any modern self-help or, ancient spiritual text, the ego is always the villain.
Always.
We are told to destroy the ego, to undergo ego death, to realize the self is just an illusion. But this material argues that saying I is actually a crucial, necessary first step.
It is entirely necessary, because you cannot have responsibility without a center.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Think about it mechanically. Thinking, choosing, and acting. They all require a point of origin. You cannot be responsible for your actions or your community or your mistakes if there's no you to take the blame or the credit.
Oh, I see.
The I is the anchor of human agency.
So the self is a beginning, not a destination.
Precisely. We deeply misunderstand the ego. Like you said, we either try to annihilate it completely because we think it's evil, or we guard it like an untouchable sanctuary.
Right, building these massive defensive walls around our identity.
Yeah, but the point is neither to destroy it nor to exalt it. The point is to view it as an amana, that's the term used, an entrustment.
An entrustment, man, I really love that word. It completely shifts the gravity of just being a person.
It does.
Because the idea is that an entrustment is not a deed of ownership, right? It's a call to responsibility. The sense of self we're given is meant to be used and cared for, not possessed.
Let's look at how we normally speak to illustrate this. When we say I, we unconsciously construct an entire language of property.
Right. My car, my job.
Exactly. We say my success, my intellect, my body, my power. We credit all these things to our own independent genius.
Sure.
But if we pause and really look closely, this I actually stands at the intersection of countless conditions that we did not create.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, the intellect you were born with, your willpower, your genetic makeup, even the opportunities of the specific era you were born in. None of these are purely your own production.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to admit, my immediate modern reaction to this is some serious pushback.
I expect nothing less. Let's hear it.
I want to say, wait a minute. I worked 80 hours a week for my degree. I pulled the night shifts. I sacrificed my weekends for that promotion.
Right, you put in the sweat equity.
Exactly. So it feels incredibly dismissive, almost offensive, to be told I don't own my success.
It feels dismissive because you are actively using that language of property to validate your self-worth. It's a totally natural reflex.
Yeah.
But let's look at it differently. Imagine you rent a magnificent, fully furnished, beautiful house.
Okay, I'm with you. A really nice rental.
You move in, you maintain it, you pay the utilities, you keep it spotless. You might even plant a beautiful garden in the backyard.
I'm putting in the work.
You are actively participating in living there, and your labor is very real and valuable.
Yeah.
But if you start acting like you hold the deed, like if you try to knock down the load-bearing walls, or you boast to the neighbors that you personally laid the concrete foundation, you have become burdened by an absolute illusion.
Huh. Because I didn't build a foundation, I'm just lucky enough to live on it.
Right. And what happens when you think you own something you actually don't?
You become terrified of losing it.
Exactly. You spend all your psychological energy defending a property line that isn't even real. That is why the ego grows so unbelievably heavy.
Oh, man.
When you think you own your success or your intellect or your status, you have to constantly defend them against any slight or criticism.
Which is just exhausting. But if I view my life and my mind and my body as an entrustment, like that rental house, I'm a caretaker. I have massive responsibility to keep the house in good order, but I don't have that existential terror of ownership.
There is a brilliant phrase in the sources that captures this perfectly. It says, "He who deems himself owner grows heavy. He who knows it as trust awakens."
Wow.
Viewing the self as a trust settles the ego into its rightful place. And crucially, It changes how you interact with everything around you. People, events, and relationships, stopping objects for you to own or manipulate.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, they become realms of responsibility to be touched.
Beautifully put, yes.
Which is such a stark contrast to how we operate today. I was really struck by the critique of the digital age in these essays.
Oh, it's scathing.
It really is. We live in a culture that demands we constantly polish the eye. Yeah. We curate our virtual identities. We optimize our LinkedIn profiles. We track our follower counts.
We make ourselves very shiny.
Right. But polishing the eye does absolutely nothing to deepen it.
We're building selves that shine brilliantly, but have zero root system.
Yeah.
And what happens to a tree with no roots?
It completely crumbles at the slightest tremor.
Exactly. If your entire identity is based on the visibility of your eye, then a single negative comment or a momentary failure destroys you. You have no structural integrity.
But the consciousness of an entrustment, that provides a silent, enduring dignity. You become reliable rather than merely visible.
And realizing this naturally shifts the I into a we.
Because if your life is an entrustment, you look around and realize everyone else is carrying a trust too.
Exactly. It forces a shared responsibility. You learn to respect the absolute center of another person while still guarding your own. But, and this is a really important caveat from the texts, even we isn't the final stop.
No, it isn't. Because a we can easily become just as dangerous and arrogant as an I, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think of hypernationalism or extreme corporate tribalism or even toxic online communities. A group collective can become a massive, heavy ego if it forgets where its entrustment came from.
It just scales up the problem.
Right. Therefore, balance requires a third point of reference, which they call he.
Meaning the absolute, the infinite, the true owner.
Yes. And we need to ground this, because introducing the concept of the absolute isn't just a theological point here. In this framework, it is a profoundly practical psychological mechanism.
How so? Like mechanically?
Think back to the rental house. If you and your roommates, the we, forget that there's a landlord, you start fighting over who owns the property. You start making up your own arbitrary rules.
Chaos ensues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Introducing the absolute is the recognition of an order, a reality, that is infinitely larger than yourself. It's the ultimate landlord.
Right.
Remembering this doesn't crush the individual I or scatter the collective we. It simply keeps everything in proper alignment. It mechanically prevents your ego or your group's identity from becoming an idol.
It's basically the ultimate relief valve for human anxiety because it reminds you that you are not the center of the universe. You are just carrying a trust.
That takes an enormous weight off your shoulders.
It really does. Okay, so if our self is this delicate entrustment, how do we actually manage it day to day? Like, how do we educate and nurture ourselves without accidentally tearing down the walls of the rental property?
That is the big question.
This brings us to the mechanics of inner growth, which the text calls turbai, or refinement.
This is where the rubber meets the road. We take the theoretical architecture we just built and apply it to the incredibly messy reality of living.
Because nurturing a human being, whether that's raising a child or managing a team or just trying to fix your own bad habits, is famously difficult.
It's that exhausting tug of war we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive. We are constantly caught between this intense desire to control every outcome and the fear of letting go entirely.
And both of those extremes usually stem from very good intentions, right? We want things to go well.
We do. But when we lose the sense of measure, those good intentions curdle into an exhausting burden. True refinement, true turbai, is defined not as discipline alone and not as freedom alone. It is defined as balance. And specifically, balance is described as fidelity to the truth of things and happenings.
Fidelity to the truth of things, meaning dealing with reality exactly as it is, not how we stubbornly wish it to be.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And to explain how this balance practically works, we need to talk about one of the most illuminating metaphors I've ever come across in these texts, the skeleton and the breath.
Yes, let's build this out. Because if we think about the human body, if you approach your life or your personal growth purely through strict discipline, what are you? You are just a skeleton.
Exactly. And what does a skeleton do? It provides absolute direction, it allows you to stand upright against gravity, and it keeps you whole.
Right.
Discipline is the internal structure that stops you from collapsing.
But if you are only a skeleton, you're a Halloween decoration.
Pretty much.
You're rigid, dry, brittle, and totally lifeless. You can stand tall, but you can't actually move or interact with the world.
Right. So you desperately need freedom, which the texts compare to the body's outer form, the flesh, and the breath. Freedom is the life force. It grants movement, warmth, and self-expression. It is what makes the structure alive.
But, and here's the crucial warning for the other extreme. If you have all that freedom and breath, but you entirely remove the skeleton, what happens?
The body completely collapses into a puddle.
Gross, but true.
It has no structural integrity. It knows neither where to stop nor where to turn. It is completely scattered. The dynamic between these two forces is perfectly captured in this couplet. Hardness builds the bone but wounds the soul. Freedom grants the breath, yet without measure it scatters all.
That is powerful.
Yeah.
If you are listening to this right now and realizing that you are your own worst dictator, if you demand absolute perfection from yourself, if you critique your every move, this is exactly why you feel so exhausted and hollow at the end of the day. You are all bone and no breath. You are literally breaking yourself from within.
And the inverse is equally true. If you are entirely boundless with yourself, if you refuse to set any alarms, hold no personal accountability, and just let every passing whim dictate your day, you are all breath and no bone.
You cannot carry the weight of responsibility.
Education and refinement aren't about building a rigid cage, nor are they about opening the door to the wild. Maturity is the incredibly difficult ability to simultaneously set a boundary and open space for yourself.
So what does this all mean? How do we actually do that? Because when I hear the word balance, I instantly picture a statue.
A statue.
Yeah, I picture a monk standing perfectly still, holding some complex yoga pose on top of a mountain, completely frozen in time. But based on everything we've discussed about the skeleton and the breath, it feels like balance isn't a statue at all. It's much more like riding a bicycle.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Unpack the bicycle for me.
Well, when you are successfully riding a bike, you aren't actually perfectly upright and static. It's physically impossible. What you are actually doing is constantly falling slightly to the left, feeling that pull of gravity, and then turning the wheel to catch yourself. And then you overcorrect and fall slightly to the right, and you adjust again.
Yes, exactly.
You are making hundreds of tiny, active, continuous micro-adjustments just to stay upright and keep moving forward. If you freeze your arms and try to just be a rigid statue on a bicycle, you instantly crash.
This raises an important question, though, and it highlights a deeply uncomfortable truth about human nature. We absolutely hate the bicycle. We want the statue.
Because the statue is easy. Once you're a statue, you don't have to do any more work.
Exactly. We have an intense desire for quick, permanent fixes. The easy way out in life is always choosing a side.
Just picking one extreme.
It is intellectually and emotionally lazy to just throw your hands up and say, I'm going to be a completely controlling, rigid person, or I'm going to just let everything go and whatever happens, happens.
You basically abdicate the responsibility of the entrustment.
You do, because picking a side means you don't have to pay attention anymore. Balance requires intense, continuous labor. It requires your full attention.
Wow.
That is why balance is simultaneously the most vital and the most neglected of things. It is completely invisible to the outside world, but its consequences are glaringly obvious in how our lives turn out. There is a proverb in the text that perfectly summarizes the cost of this. No mercy without labor.
No mercy without labor. You do not get the grace, the peace, or the ease of a balanced life without the hard, continuous work of paying attention.
True progress moves slowly but firmly. Loading information into your brain is easy. Digesting it and settling it is hard. Refinement is not a finish line you cross, as the phrase goes. Refinement is a living calibration.
A living calibration. That is the phrase of the deep dive right there. Because life isn't static. As you age, as you take on a new job, as you suffer a loss, your environment shifts. The exact ratio of skeleton to breath that worked for you 5 years ago will not work for you today.
You have to negotiate a new treaty between discipline and freedom every single morning.
Which brings everything we've explored today into a single, cohesive framework. Let's synthesize this journey for everyone listening. If we want to build a mind that can endure the chaos of the modern world, we cannot just frantically hoard data. We have to strip away the hyperbolic noise, use measured thought, and settle our wisdom. We have to fold the clothes we already have.
And to hold that wisdom securely, we have to completely reframe our ego. We have to stop defending our I like it's a piece of property we own and start treating it as a fluid entrustment, a rental house we are responsible for caring for.
Acknowledging that our intellect, our time, and our environment are not purely our own production, which naturally connects us to the we and grounds us in the he, the absolute landlord. This relieves that crushing psychological burden of ownership and stops our identity from becoming a brittle idol that shatters when criticized.
And finally, we have to practice daily turbi, refinement. Understanding that maturity is the constant, labor-intensive act of marrying the rigid skeleton of discipline with the expansive breath of freedom.
So the next time you find yourself endlessly scrolling, trying to polish a digital identity that has no roots, or the next time you feel completely torn between being a harsh dictator to yourself or just giving up entirely, remember that you are simply carrying a trust. And your only job is that living calibration.
It is a profound shift in perspective. But, looking at all these concepts laid out together, the bicycle, the entrustment, the living calibration, there's one final, almost hidden implication here.
Oh.
Something we haven't explicitly mentioned, but that naturally emerges from this entire architecture.
Where does this lead us?
We spend so much energy trying to maintain that perfect tension between the skeleton and the breath. We labor continuously to stay upright on the bicycle. We fear making a mistake. But if balance is truly a living calibration and our self is merely an entrustment we are learning how to carry, what happens to that entrustment in the moments we inevitably lose our balance and fall?
Because we will fall. No one rides the bicycle perfectly forever.
We will definitely fall. But perhaps the act of falling, of breaking our rhythm and having to do the hard, painful work to recalibrate and stand back up, perhaps that isn't a failure of refinement at all.
Wait, really?
Perhaps the fall itself is exactly the labor required to transform a superficially polished I into a deeply rooted one. You really don't know the structural integrity of your entrustment until you've dropped it, examined the pieces, and had to deliberately put it back together.
Wow. The fall isn't the opposite of balance. The fall is the absolute prerequisite for recalibration. You can't calibrate something that never moves.
Exactly.
That is incredibly freeing. That is something that will definitely stick with me. Thank you for diving into the architecture of the soul with me. And to you listening, thank you for joining us. Take these ideas, look at your own internal rental property this week, and embrace the hard labor of your own living calibration. We will catch you on the next deep dive.